not necessarily rejects, but who can't cope. People who can't comprehend. They're dumb, they're lazy, they're this, that. But oftentimes, within the context of our school system, or our educational system, dropouts are neither. Dropouts are probably, a lot of dropouts are kids who are not properly challenged. You know, the curriculum does not challenge you. You're sitting there trying to figure out, where am I going to use this economics or this social science? Where am I going to use this French? I'm not going to France, so why should I be studying this? There's no practical application for a lot of what they're teaching you. And I understand, and it's easy to get bored if you're trying to figure out if mama going to be able to pay the rent, and then you sitting there looking at something that has no practical application for you. I flunked economics twice when I was in high school, and then I went to college and majored in economics. Yeah. Why did I major in economics? First of all, I wanted to be taught something. By the time I got to college, I was motivated to the extent that I wanted to learn something. And there was no need for me to go to college and major in something that I felt I had some degree of competency in. Because if I had done that, I would have been just pretty much telling the teacher or the system what I knew, as opposed to learning from those particular areas. So when I went to college, I majored in economics. Now, there are some practical applications of things, and I think that when you list the reasons and you try to profile who is a dropout, and we did that when we talked to a lot of these people, we said, well, what does the typical dropout look like? I mean, what are they composed of? And then they would try to, okay, I need to put it back on in the back. I'll let you know to put it up. They would try to conceptualize or build a profile of what a typical dropout looked like. And they would start talking about kids who couldn't cope, who weren't necessarily intelligent, this, that, and the other. But that's not necessarily what a dropout is. My grades in high school being C, D, F, or whatever, a combination of all of those, were not indicative of my intelligence. They had nothing to do with my ability to do anything. Now, I've seen C students, and we interviewed last week Mr. Joe Dudley, and I think all of you may have read where Mr. Dudley donated $250,000 or pledge, and that's drive, the motivation. And, you know, when I said when you drop out of high school, or when you drop out of school, you drop out of society. That's only if you quit. When I dropped out, I didn't quit. You were subject to find me in the libraries when I dropped out of school. I wasn't in school, but I was in the library. I was in the, I would go down to the courts. A lot of my buddies were in court at that time, so, you know, I just go down there with them and see how much time they were going to get. And I'd hang around the court, and I would watch the way the judicial system dealt with people. Because once they categorize you, there's a certain mentality with the way that they deal with it. You know, you're not going, as a dropout, you're not going to command the type of respect from people that you should get as a human being in this society. And that's a shame. That is not indicative of anything you deserve, but it is a reality. So I'm saying within the context of what you need to understand is there certain things that are naturally against you as a dropout. There's a certain way that people look at you if they know you're a dropout. There's certain perceptions they have of you, but you can't let that stop you. It didn't stop Joe Dudley. He went on and graduated. He was not a dropout, but again, they was considering him to be mentally retarded. Went on and graduated, went to A&T, and at A&T, I think it took him 6 years to finish what he should have gotten out in 4 years. He didn't stop. He went out there. When I came down to Greensboro, or shortly before I came, he was out there almost like an Avon lady, door to door, knocking doors, mixing the solution at home, had his wife at home, mixing solution in the bathtub and all that. And I wish we had the video. We went out to his house after we talked to him and went through his plant, and it's like 3 tiers and overseas pond or lake, and it's 6 acres of land, and it's unreal, you know, how much he has achieved. And I don't say that out of any material, saying, hey, materialistically, this is what you can achieve. I don't say that for that reason. Because if material gains is your motive, then there are a lot quicker and easier ways to get rich and to get material things. See, with underlying the theme of our society, we don't need to be looking at our kids saying, you need this much money, or you need to become a millionaire, or your measurement as a man, or what have you, is whether you have money and whether you can boss people around and things of that nature. Because within the context of obtaining those material things, if you're saying that to your kids, if you say, hey, you need to be a millionaire by the time that you're 25, there are too many different ways you can get to become a millionaire. If you want to become a distributor of crack, you might become a millionaire in little or no time, as opposed to working your way through like Joe Dudley, not quitting. So we may be destroying ourselves in terms of trying to achieve material gain. But what we need to do is concentrate on values and giving a quality service. If you look at our program outlined in Relay, our TV production component is only one portion of that. Now, a lot of these kids came in to work with us, and they range in age, this group ranges in age from 15 on up through, are you 21? Okay, 15 to 19, but our 19-year-old is in camp this week. A lot of people think Carlos is, one lady said she thought he was, how old did you say you thought Carlos was? 21? Carlos is 15, and Carlos came to us when he was 14, and he's been working with us ever since. That's Carlos. We have a lot of kids that we bring in our in-studio production, where the kids produce their own television show in the studio. We have 8-year-olds that run the sound, the audio board. That's 5 different sources of sound, and I'll show you a lot of that on the slides a little later. 5 different sources of sound that's bringing up the microphones on as many as 8 different mics, that's controlling the sound checks, cassettes, reel-to-reel tape. There's a video source from the back. So that 8-year-old is responsible for a whole lot. But that 8-year-old handles it comfortably. We have 11-year-old on the graphics keyboard, which is a graphics computer. So we have a lot of, and people say, well, why do you expose kids to that? Because there's more positive, it's more constructive than having those kids at home or in the streets after school or just watching soap operas. We had one young lady, she came to us when she was 14, she's 15 now, and she is a darn good camera person. She can work circles around a lot of people in terms of doing camera work. She came to us when she was 14, and the only thing she was doing after school was she was talking on the phone, what did she say, talking on the phone, watching soap operas for about 3 or 4 hours, then going out on the corner and watching the boys. Now that's the formula for teenage pregnancy. You know, just like you got a formula for what causes dropouts, that's the formula for teenage pregnancy. You watch those soap operas, they don't do anything all day but switch sheets. And, you know, and so, you know, it's just a natural progression. Then you go out there on the corner and you watch the boys walk by. Sooner or later, if you're halfway decent, one of them going to hit on you. So what I'm saying is, rather than have this type of, old folks say, there's a lot of wisdom in old folks. Like Richard Pryor said, you don't get to be old and be a fool too. You do one or the other. And there's a lot of wisdom in what old folks say, and they say idle mind's the devil's workshop. Within that context, you can't just leave kids latchkey kids. And that's another major part. If you look at the way that they deal with dropout prevention now, they're talking about early intervention. That's a key buzzword, which means getting the kids when they're at a very early age. Well, we were already about doing that before they made it a code word. They talk about latchkey kids. Okay, if you are a working mother, as many of you may be, and your kids go home and they got a key and they go in and close the door, what happens behind closed doors you don't know till you get there and survey the damage. Okay, whether they get there and they watch the HBO or they find some videos and put in the VCR or what have you, or whether they just sit there, that's still non-productive time. They may do their homework, but we need some application. A lot of what's wrong with our educational system is not you as the students, It is the educational system itself. It is not the dropouts. It is the system that creates the dropouts. And what I mean by that, we do not have a system in this country that is conducive to producing students. Think about it. What we have in this country is a system that's conducive to producing degree candidates. Why do you go to school in this country? Whether you're in high school or whether you go to college. Give me an answer. You yawning, so I'm boring you, so give me an answer. To learn? Oh, that was the wrong answer. I should have coached you. Okay. That's a good answer. That's right. That should be the right answer. But unfortunately, in this country, the reason you go to school, now that you come back to school, you're going to learn, right? Before, I guarantee you, before when you went to school, you went to get a degree because your parents wanted you to go, you had to go, and you went to get a degree, didn't you? Okay. Now, is that the same thing as saying I'm going to school to learn? No, because there's too many different ways you can get a degree without learning. I can go and copy off of Chris's paper and just get me a degree, or he can copy off my paper, or I could go and pay somebody to do a term paper for me. I can go and find out what the teacher likes, what turns the teacher on. When I was in college, I found out a certain professor had an alcoholic problem, liked to drink. I wear the ABC store out. You know, go get a bottle and go by there and talk to Professor so-and-so, and I allowed to come away with the keys to the next day's test. You know, it wasn't about me learning that material. It was about me getting an A on that test. So why do you get the A's? Why do you get the degree? Because you haven't learned anything. You come out maybe as ignorant or more ignorant because you think you know now. Before you went in, you knew you didn't know. Now you think you know because you got a degree, but you haven't learned anything. But you come out with that degree, and you can prostitute yourself off to IBM or Xerox or somebody and say, hey, look, I got this degree. How much you going to pay me for this degree? It's a BS degree, which you can use your own judgment of what that stands for. But, you know, BS, BA degree. So what are you going to pay me for this? And IBM said, oh, for that degree in that area, we'll pay you, we'll start you at $22,000. So you go back to school and you come back with a master's degree. So how much you going to pay me for this? Well, we'll start you at, you MBA master's? Okay, we'll give you $28,000. So you go back and you come back with a PhD degree. And the only thing you're really doing is saying, you know, it isn't necessarily that you have learned that much. How many of you saw in the paper a couple of months ago where this guy had submitted a dissertation? And when you get a PhD degree or something like that, you have to submit a course of study that they call a dissertation. And it has to be validated by all these scholars who say this is a good piece of work and it's valid, and you are now capable of being a PhD or what have you. Now that's just a cut and dry way of saying the process. But how many of you saw in the paper where this guy submitted a paper in 1944, I think, for his PhD degree, and the scholars told him it wasn't worthy of consideration of a PhD degree, and they didn't give it to him? And then they went back and looked at it again just this year, and they decided that he was worthy of a PhD degree. Some 40-something years later, they give him a degree. Now, is the man any more smarter today than he was 44 years ago? I mean, that paper, he didn't go back and correct anything. He didn't go back and do further research and say, I submit this. What he did was a different group of people looked at it and said, oh yeah, you smart enough to be called doctor. So what I'm saying is, within the context of this educational system, it is not about learning. It is about obtaining degrees. You know, how you get that degree, nobody's going to ask you, did you make A's in that class? Or they're not going to ask you, how did you make A's? I'll give you another example. My kid comes home and she has A's on her report card, or she has a test and she has 100 all over the test. What am I going to do? What do you do when your child comes home and has 100 on the test? Okay, who has a kid that has come home with 100 on the test in the last 2 years? Okay, there you go. What do you do when your child brings you 100 home? Give them something. Okay, you reward them, right? The reason I'm pointing this out is because I do the same thing. You know, I do the same. My kid gets an A or 100. I say, you know, girl, you're brilliant. I mean, you take after your daddy or something like that. You know, you really boost her up. But the problem with that is we never ask the kid, what did you do to get that 100? In other words, what question did you answer? I mean, what is this? You said they said that A is the correct answer. What is A? If you look at that 100, you through with the discussion. Now, if she comes home with a 60, you might say, well, what did you miss here? How did you miss that? What's that? You know, you want to know all the wrong answers. But when they come home with 100, you satisfied. I mean, you're not even going to question whether they said that Reagan is a saint or Wallace is a saint or the Klan is our saving organization or anything. You know, I'm not, that's a exaggerated example, but they could have been saying anything because it's in the teachers. Some of the grading is subjective. It's with math and science. Yes, that may be a concise science, so that you have to know that 2 + 2 = 4 for them to get a correct answer there. But in English and in social studies and some of these other subjects, it's subjective. I sat in a class in high school, and I was in the first wave of, I guess I have, when you talk about Vietnam, or you talk about being a high school dropout, you talk about being raised in the projects, and you talk about teenage crime and all that, I have personal experiences, so I draw on a lot of that. I sat in a class, and we had the first integration of the Raleigh school system where I grew up. There were 52 blacks that went into Enloe, and there were 952 whites. Needless to say, we had to fight a lot of days to get to class, just to get in the classroom. And sitting in that classroom, I remember I did in the 11th grade, I did a term paper that was 63 pages long. Now that's some research. Most college students won't do a 10-page term paper, and they do that the day of that is due and get it postponed. I had done the research, a 63-page term paper on race relations since 1865. My teacher asked me, she had a daughter that was a sociology major and a psychology major at Duke University, and she asked me to buy the paper so that her daughter could use it to critique, and I wouldn't sell it to her. It was good enough for her daughter to buy with very few grammatical errors, and I ended up with a D- on that paper. I passed in another paper the next year, but also had a reputation. And that reputation coming out of the ghetto was one that they called me crazy because I used to fight a lot. And so they, you know, I wasn't one of the teachers' pets. I wasn't one of the favorite folks. I didn't bother folks. I didn't, you know, I was never a bully. I never went around and punched folks for just being there. You know, you got some folks that hit people just because they're there. And like the man said, everybody got to be somewhere. But you know, if I didn't like the way somebody was looking at me, Chris looked like he might have been that type too. He didn't like the way somebody was looking at you. You know, somebody had, you know, there was a fight. And you may not win, but there was a fight. And, or if somebody messed with me, they would guarantee a fight. You know, or if I perceived they were messing with me. So I wasn't one of the teacher's favorites. And I think that the next year I passed in a paper on the presidential election. Richard Nixon was running against Hubert Humphrey. This was 68, so that I'm dating myself. And I did a paper that showed, I said that the election of Nixon as president meant 4 more years of frustration for black people. And I documented it by the fact that 91 to 92% of the black vote went to Humphrey. And the teacher gave me a D- or F or something on the paper. And I looked through the paper, and I had only about 3 grammatical corrections on the thing. And I asked, I said, Miss Brown, what's wrong with my paper? She says, you passed it in late. Now, in front of me was a white girl that if her daddy was not the Grand Dragon, somebody in her family had paid membership dues. Because that girl, she opened her locker, and she had Confederate flags everywhere. She had the whole gambit, whatever it took to be identified as one of the chosen few. She was there. And she sat in front of me, and she even took up for me. It shocked me. She said, Mr. Brown, he didn't pass his paper in late because he passed his in. I read it when I passed mine up. And then the lady looked at me and she said, well, you didn't have reason to make that statement. I said, well, Mr. Brown, 92% of the black vote went to Humphrey. That's a valid statement in itself. And it was a valid statement. And I didn't have any. I had maybe 3 commas or semicolons that needed to be placed. And that's not a reason. It was not a valid reason she had to give me D-, but it was reflected in my grades. I couldn't control those things. So what I'm saying is, if I had taken an A home for the same thing, my mother wouldn't have been concerned about it. You're not concerned about it. I'm not concerned, as I should be, about my daughter's grades if they are A's, if they're 100s, if she's getting a degree. But within the normal scheme of things, a degree is not necessarily indicative of knowledge. Mark Twain once said, never let your schooling get in the way of your education. And, you know, that sounds like a little funny statement, but if you begin to look at it, that is what RELA is about. Because you can't learn everything you need to learn in this classroom or any other classroom. If you confine your education to the walls here in this classroom and reading and the things that you pick up off paper, you're going to have a serious problem in terms of education. Your education is your experiences in the streets. Your education is things that you learn from other folks. Your education is listening to me listening to you. I learned from the kids that work with us. And if you close your mind to learning, and a lot of times in this society, that's one of our problems. The people who get the PhDs figure they know it all. I mean, you can't teach them nothing. You can't go in there and say, Dr. So-and-so, this is invalid or incorrect, because they got the degree. Now, I think that this country is sort of in charge of its own dilemma. It has created its own dilemma by putting the emphasis on degrees as opposed to learning. Now, if you concentrate, like you say, on learning, you think you're going to get your certificate, your graduate certificate, GED? Okay, what are you trying to get now?
I'm just taking regular class.
Regular class? Okay. Are you going to try to get your GED? Okay, you think you'll get it?
Because I ain't been in here long enough.
Okay, I mean, but once you've been in here long enough, okay. The reason you're going to get it, and I guarantee you, I got one too. The reason you're going to get it is not because you're going to get that degree, but because you're going to learn what you need to learn, right? So that's what it is. If you concentrate on learning, the degrees and the acclimates will come. It's like if you ever go into business for yourself. If you ever go into business, people will tell you, don't go into business to make money. Go into business to provide a quality service. And in the process of providing that service, you will make some money. See, your objective and goal cannot be the making of money, because you'll get sidetracked. Somebody will say, hey, I got a deal that we can make $250,000 over here. Now, this is what you had planned to do, these things here. And you're looking at your plans, and somebody's going to come over here with a money objective, and you go chasing the money, and all this gets blown out the window. See, I might have this, and I say, hey, eventually this is going to pay off. I'm going to stick to my roadmap. Somebody come over here and say, hey, I got $500,000 worth of kilos, and how about helping me push this out in the street, and you make that much money, and you can reinvest it over here. I'm going off over here doing that. You know, this becomes a secondary agenda. So I'm saying you need to focus on what it is you want to achieve. And I would be remiss if I didn't note that I see a lot of you walking up and down Market Street, in particular a young lady here, and I got to admire because whether it's snow or hot weather or what have you, you know, you can see her walking back and forth, and I know that she has a goal or a mission or something in mind. When I worked with Relay, decided to set up Relay, it was from personal commitment. And I went down to the Greensboro, what do they call it, Daily News, and I gave them a copy of the proposal. And the reporter down there looked at me and she said, Mr. Mangum, she said, these are high objectives and goals. She said, these are high objectives and goals, but these kids can't do these things. And I looked at her and I said, I won't call her name, but I said, you know, the reason why they may not be able to do these things is because of the statement you just made. Y'all don't expect them to be able to do it. Well, let me tell you, one of the reasons, we talked about me being a Vietnam vet and having been in Vietnam, but one of the things that is troubling a lot of Vietnam vets today is that you heard of them talk about the Viet Cong, okay? In Vietnam, there were two elements that you were fighting. You were fighting the North Vietnam regular army, which were the guys with the uniforms that you saw. How many of you saw Platoon? The guys with the uniforms on and all that. That was the North Vietnam regular army. How many of you saw them go into that village and beat that boy to death, the handicapped kid and all that? A lot of those people were Viet Cong. Now, the Viet Cong were ordinary people. They were you. I would work with you during the day. You would come in and survey where I had stuff stashed or where our bunkers were, where our location was. And then at night, the bunkers get blowed up with G.I. Joe sitting in it. You know, you would come through and they would survey all the damage, and they would know where the ammo dumps were, and they would blow them up. Or they may hit you with a ground attack, or they may hit you with rockets, and you never knew where they were coming from. You never know who they were. How would I know that you were Viet Cong or not? I didn't have any way of knowing. And I didn't have any way of knowing whether you were or who was. And one of the problems that a lot of the guys, the baggage that the Vietnam vets carry around, is that a lot of the Viet Congs were 12-year-old boys. They were 10-year-olds who would wear you out with an AK-47. How many of you saw Full Metal Jacket? Okay, Albert, you don't count, you part of the production crew. Anyway, Full Metal Jacket, that sniper that was wearing everybody out ended up being a 13, 14-year-old girl when they finally shot her. And that's some heavy stuff to carry around with you when you come back and you look at your little child, you know. Not that you didn't have a reason to, because they were going to take you out, and often they did. But at the same time, you can't justify it within your own mind. And what I'm saying, the reason I'm saying that is because kids, somebody mentioned the environment. How much a role does environment play in success and dropouts and dropout prevention? If you put kids in a ghetto environment, you put them under unbearable conditions, you can bus them all over the city. You can send them to Guilford College with the most exquisite conditions. If their home environment, if their conditions are conducive to not maintaining that type of imagery, unless that child is deeply rooted, and there needs to be some moral convictions. I don't say prayer in school because you got to go beyond prayer. But I'm saying that unless you have some moral, that child takes it upon himself. Because ultimately, I don't care what the teacher will do for you or what have you. I had some kids that you may not see with us now that was with us when we came last time. Because some people you just can't help. You can give, the only thing you can do is give them opportunity. I leave it up to them as to whether they're going to take advantage of that opportunity. Because in making the opportunities, a lot of our kids would take advantage of you. I mean, you as parents, you as teachers, you as somebody who really cares and sincerely trying to help them. But the only reason I was citing that example in Vietnam with the young kids that were Viet Congs that were fighting a war. Now, they talk about the American soldiers were the youngest soldiers they sent off. We were 18, 19, 20 years old. Some of us was, older, the sergeants and the officers, they were older. But these kids was 10 and 11 in a lot of cases, 16. But we don't tend to think about that in terms of them. But what was the difference? Why were they such an effective fighting force? Because that was their environment. They had been trained in that environment. They had been this is our expectation for you to defend our country at all costs, including your life. And they went out and did it and did a good job of it. Now, what expectations do we have of our kids? There's no reason an 8-year-old can't run a sound system in a major studio. There's no reason why these kids can't do this television production. You know, there's no reason. Except for we don't expect them to. And within the context of our educational system, there are certain things that we don't expect you to be able to do. And if you come in a classroom in the regular public school system and they know that your mother is not so-and-so the teacher or father the principal, particularly under the old segregated system, they didn't expect you to be able to produce. If you came out to projects, you know, they just waited for you to fail, so to speak. And I'm saying that when the principal kicked me out of school, I ended up dropping out, but that was only because I got tired of getting put out every day. And one day he put me out. He told me, he said, first he told me if he heard my name in black in the same sentence again, that I wasn't going to get in the school system in Raleigh anywhere. And then he told me when I dropped out, he said, you're going to always be a failure because you will never be able to have this diploma. And I told him, I said, you know, I'm not going to let a piece of paper dictate the quality of my life. I will not allow a piece of paper to dictate the quality of my life. And I said, whether that's a marriage certificate, a piece of paper, or money, whatever, I think that I will continue to go forth and do what it is I need to do. And it was difficult. It's more difficult to get a GED and start college in Vietnam than it is to sit in this classroom and learn. Sometimes it's not, you don't think it's as difficult because you have to keep awake and alert in here when you could get you're getting bored to death by somebody like me, and it's easy to fall asleep. And over there you don't fall asleep because you might have eternal sleep. So you continue to be alert as often as possible until physically you can't deal with it. But if you, within your own rights, feel like, hey, this is what I'm going to do, and I'm not going to stop here. I'm not going to stop with a GED. I'm going to go ahead and use that GED to go to college. Then, fine, you go to college. When I got ready to go to college, I had taken the courses on the University of Maryland over in Vietnam. And I think I recited the example where I came down the end of the compound and we canceled classes because we had to pick up body parts and put them in bags and stuff when the rocket had blew up some of the other, another group of soldiers. But when I came back from the university, I had 2 or 3 courses from the University of Maryland. I transferred those to A&T. You're supposed to take the SAT to get into college, right? I never took the SAT. Yet I graduated with honors and was student body president at A&T. While I was at A&T, I put together a program of, how many of you ever heard of Parkway Janitorial? Parkway Services. You work for them? Okay, they're located right over here, about 2 blocks from here. Parkway Services was a company that I helped originate. I formulated and put together a program for them. And while I was in school as a student, Ebony Magazine came down and did an 8 or 10-page story on Parkway. And I ended up being in Ebony and all and signed a few autographs and all that kind of stuff. ABC News came down and did a special on it. And that's how I ended up in Hartford, Connecticut, because they, United Technologists came down and recruited me based on what they had read in Ebony and seen on ABC. So that is enough. You know, what I'm saying is I felt that the GED was just the beginning of opening up other opportunities. And that's the way you need to see it. You can't look back on the things that you did or could have done or would have done. When I was 16, I got jacked up by the FBI and interrogated. I don't know whether I should tell y'all that now because statute of limitations may not be out. And y'all need to edit that part out too. But those types of things you have to sort of put behind you and have your agenda for going forward. You have to say, this is what I'm going to do, and understand and know that you're not going to get a lot of support. If those of you that's waiting for even your family members to stroke you on the back and say, hey, I'm behind you 100% of the way, forget it. Those of you who are waiting for somebody to come through and say, hey, I care more about you than I do myself, forget it. Yeah. What you're going to have to do is dig down deep inside and say, 5 years from now, this is what I want to be doing, and this is how I'm going to do it. And if you can't do that, then even sitting in this class, you're sort of fooling yourself. Because nobody, and this is a competitive society. A capitalistic society is a very competitive society. So why should Joe Blow come over here to help you when he's in the same boat, by and large? And we don't have too many people. The most successful people we have in our community that you're looking at riding by is about 2 paychecks removed from the same position you in. If they miss 2 paychecks, you see the man with the record truck pulling the Mercedes right past you. You see the house with a foreclosure sign on it. I know. I missed some paychecks when I was working with Burlington Industry. And I lost my house, my family, and a lot more. You know. So it ain't easy. You see somebody wearing a suit and walking around and they talking like, well, you know, I need to go by Wachovia to counterbalance my balance check. You know, all that kind of nonsense. That's Willie Popcorn. We used to call it Willie Popcorn. You know, he's sounding good as long as that man writes that check and sends it to him. But day one he missed that check. You see my man all over town trying to figure, hey man, look here, can you, you know, articulation going out the window. He's talking ghetto talk. Man, I need you to cover this thing here. You know. So now, again, there are very few people who are in a position to help you. First of all, I use a formula that says that 90% of the people can't help you and 10% and, well, 9% won't. You're dealing with human elements. You're dealing with petty jealousy. This program that we have, you can turn around and look at the kids. You can look at any of our production, anything that comes on tonight at 7:30, comes on every Tuesday night at 7:30 on Cable 8, and you'll say, I want my child in that program. I want my child to get that exposure. And you'll wonder, why doesn't all of Greensboro come up and support? You know how much money I have gotten from Greensboro? Okay. Give me that key so I know what to do. Stand still. Come on, y'all know I can't do that. Y'all know how much money I have gotten from businesses in Greensboro in terms of supporting this program? I got $50 from Joe Dudley, and this was in May. Now, there are programs in Greensboro that have $250,000 for tutorial programs, and yet we have operated our program, and as of yet, now we're going to have to start charging, because the school system is charging us $1,200 a month to maintain our headquarters down at Mount Zion. But there hasn't been a parent or a child that has paid to participate in the program. And we have trained over 34 kids on all aspects of TV production. We have bought, purchased, and given away over 1,000 books. Some of your kids may have gotten books from RELA, the RIF program, brand new books. Now, how did we do that with no money, essentially? Z. Smith Reynolds gave us a small grant, but, you know, I don't get paid a big salary. I do what's necessary to sort of keep the program going. Mr. George Bishop here that y'all may see at the majors. If y'all ever hear the majors playing in town, y'all check George and them out, because he's not just has that band that will provide good music. He's also seriously interested in the community. He's given of his own time and resources. All his cameras and stuff that you see in here doesn't belong to RELA. That's his equipment that he's entrusted with these youth participants, and has worked with us all summer in doing these productions. So you do have people out there who are willing to help you, that are seriously interested in the community, and they're not beating their own bandwagon and what have you. That's the way that we've been able to achieve what we've achieved this summer, is through those types of commitment. George has a son, David, was 18, and is also, for those of you who have kids or who may like rap music, has his own group. It's called Old Shabazz and Imperial Force, and they were in the paper. They were featured in the paper, I think the 29th of July, in that entertainment section. And they are we've had them on the show, and if we could get popular demand in, they'd probably be on every week, because we always get flooded with calls when they're on, people wanting to see them. And but I think that it's this type of dedication between what George is doing and Joe Dudley. And George, unfortunately, does not have $250,000 that he can throw in the relay like Mr. Dudley committed to Dudley High. But still, the effects is the same, the results is the same, and maybe even more productive, you know. Because when you give $250,000, you cannot dictate, or you don't know how all that money is going to be utilized and how effective it's going to be. But when you give your time, and you put the type of resources and the time that we've put into this program, you can see where the results is going. Now, I don't want to continue to dwell on this in a lecture series. What I'd like to do is respond to some questions that you may have relative to a number of different situations, whether it's high school dropouts, our documentary, how is Chris going to appear on the screen, anything, or if you're going to talk about Vietnam or what have you. You know, I'd like to be open to those questions. And I almost forgot I got the slides, and what I'm going to do with the slides, I won't answer the questions first still anyway. But what I'm going to do with the slides, I'm going to briefly go through them and show you some of the kids in the studio production and see how, so that you can begin to visualize and conceptualize how they operate. Anybody have any questions? No question.
Maybe I'm seeing your screen back here.
Oh, okay.
Is it some way that it can be turned a little bit so that
Oh.
you turn it and not it out of it?
Well, where's the best location? I had them put it up back there, but
Maybe
up here?
We could just let, we won't have to go from the movie, just turn it around so that as they move back, and why don't we just let maybe each student walk past you up there and tell their name and what their goal is. I believe in making them participate. And you know, these that are on having their nap time, we'll let them go first because that kind of jars people back to reality. But I think it's real nice to allow students to see their themselves, just if you can just give them a moment or two.
What?
Quickly say who they are and what their goal is.
They can probably zoom from the camera and hit them.
You all can do that. Start and let each one, because you know how you like to look there and see yourself. Oh yeah, that's good. That's good. Okay.
What's her name? Miss Brandon. Miss Brandon, before you do that, I just want to say that I'm not responsible for this part of it. I didn't know she was going to do this, so this is not part of my agenda. I didn't want everybody mad at me. Man, you take it now.
It doesn't bother me a bit, and you were talking about students being voters. They can't risk getting bored in here because when they do something like that, it's going to fall right on them.
Now this is an excellent class here.
So we try not to have people be bored. But anyway, where can y'all do it? So a person can say their name